So I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Tuesday, April 7th, 2020. The year which will go down in history as the longest year in our lives, I'm sure. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We kind of break the rules here for Native radio. We don't do prayers or buffalo speeches or get into any kind of Native mysticism, none of that stuff. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity. And we may step on a few toes along the way, but our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that is heaped upon us, and we do it all right here from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We do it all live right here from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. But first, let me remind people that our audio streams on our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. We stream live video of the show via Facebook Live on our Facebook group page and a bunch of them. We take the audio and we put it up on SoundCloud, so it goes out as a podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms. And we take the video and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. I encourage you to subscribe to our podcast and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can catch not only the work that we do here in studio, in our audio studio essentially, but the short form videos that we do as well. All right, I got a lot to do today here. I do have a guest that's joining me. I've got Desiree Kane, and I have to qualify this now. Same last name, same spelling, but we're not related. But we'll talk. I mean, we are related because we're Ongwe, but we'll get into that a little bit later. First, let me as I've been doing since this whole pandemic thing has really overtaken so much of the news cycle. I've got some numbers I've got to run. So let me talk a little bit about COVID-19. We crossed the 400,000 case mark in the United States. But again, I got to qualify the number. These are cases confirmed by a test, and I'm going to stress that point because the numbers are not accurate. They're accurate in terms of, you know, the number of people tested and the positive tests that have come out of those, the positive results that come out of those tests. But again, across the 400,000 mark, the new cases for the day, over 33,000 new cases for the day. A lot of these numbers seem to be record setting, but the real scary record set today was the number of new deaths for the day. Almost 2,000, 1,970 new deaths for one day, bringing the total number of deaths up to 12,841 for the 24-hour period just preceding this show. But, you know, and I get my numbers from a website. I've talked about it before. It's called Worldometers. .info. They've got a bunch of, you know, stats that they run, but they've dedicated some real good space to the COVID-19 pandemic. And, you know, something I posted the other day, and they you know, they've got graphs and charts and all kinds of things. They even give numbers on how much testing has been done, which in the United States still has not reached 0.7%, over 0.7% of the U.S. population. That's why I say the numbers are somewhat, you know, tough to you know, put that much confidence in. But there was something that was posted on this page the other day, and it runs along the same lines of something that I've talked about on the show, which has to do with the deaths that are occurring that will never be attributed to this, although should be. And this is what was written. Just let's see. An estimated additional, this is for New York City, an estimated additional 180 to 195 deaths per day occurring at home in New York City due to COVID-19 are not being counted in the official figures. Early on in this crisis, we were able to swab people who died at home and thus got a coronavirus reading. But those days are long gone. We simply do not have the testing capacity for large numbers of dying at home. And this came from Mark Levine, chair of New York City Council, the Health Committee. So he's you know, this is a public official. This isn't, you know, this isn't somebody spinning conspiracy theories. Now, the other thing that is worth mentioning, there's been a study by disease modelers at the University of Texas in Austin, and that states that given the low testing rates throughout the country, they're assuming that 1 in 10 cases are tested and reported. So in other words, if there's 400,000 confirmed via these tests cases, then, and this is a conservative number, by the way, then the likelihood is there's 4 million people who are positive or who have been positive. Some have, in all likelihood recovered. Some have died. And as I said, the numbers will never be tracked. This is where this is at now. It's funny. I did a show before this whole thing came down. I talked about our dystopian future is now. I don't even know if I did it here, if I did it as my show in New York, but we are at a place right now where not only is this, and I never use the word surreal, but are we living something that is not normal? I don't care. You can call it new normal all you want. It's not normal. And it's not even reality. I mean, it's real, but it's not the reality that any of us have ever lived before. These are unprecedented times. And the thing that makes it even more crazy or surreal is the fact that we have an unprecedented level of incompetence in the positions of leadership, not just in the United States. I'm not just talking about Trump. Yeah, he is the buffoon above all buffoons. Don't get me wrong. But the level of incompetence that you're seeing in places like Brazil, again, some of these coups that are being attempted in places like Brazil and Venezuela and Bolivia, some of the leadership, the moron who's now fighting for his life in the hospital in England, Boris Johnson, some of these buffoons who have managed in this world that we live in today to get themselves in positions of authority. It's just incredible. I mean, and of course it exacerbates the issue in such a way. And look, the dystopian future people have written about and made movies over. It is now, folks. This is a crazy time, and look, it is on us. I mean, the people. I mean, I'm not saying Americans. I just mean people to come up with solutions to some of the problems that we're presented with. And that leads me to my guest. My guest is Desiree Kane. She's Miwok, and I believe that's from Northern California, if I'm not mistaken.
Hey, John.
Hey, Desiree. Let me give you a little intro.
Sure.
She is one of the founders and the digital content editor / director at Pollen Nation magazine. She is part of the Indigenous Voices of the Poor People's Campaign. And we just worked together on a webinar just this past weekend associated with the Poor People's Campaign. She is a neighbor working on providing mutual aid in occupied territory, which is people know as Colorado, and is a part of the rent strike and eviction defense. And which is part of what we're going to talk about. But she's also done work on missing and murdered Indigenous women. She's founder of Missing Indigenous Sisters Tools Initiative, a.k.a. Misty. She has done camera work for some of the Standing Rock exhibits that have been presented, and is also not only done camera work, but she's an associate producer on a documentary about the Battle of Standing Rock, and we can talk a little bit about that as well. But let me introduce somebody that I've been asked for the last several years. Are you related to Desiree Kane? And I said, no, we are not related. But we spell our last name the same. You're on one side of Turtle Island, and I'm on the other, although right now you're in Colorado. But our Miwok, that's from Northern California, is that right?
Yes, thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for joining me.
Sure, yeah. My ancestral territory is just outside of Sacramento.
Okay, that's what I thought. I think I went there. I met with some folks on the council there. We were looking at doing some sustainable energy projects or something like that years and years ago. But
cool.
So I am somewhat familiar. But now you're living in Mountain Time, right?
Yep, I am in Estes Park, Colorado, in occupied Arapaho territory.
Now, we did get a chance to join each other on this Poor People's Campaign, which explored the doctrine of Christian discovery, or the doctrine of discovery, and how it relates to causing essentially poverty. And that was all part of the Poor People's Campaign and the repudiation of that. And we did that Saturday and Sunday. So you and I got a chance in the run up to that to talk a little bit, and of course we both participated in that thing. So which was kind of interesting. I've never done a webinar before, so this was kind of new to me. But it's what's necessary in these strange times that we're living in.
Mm-hmm.
So, but as we deal with this idea of poverty and people who are impoverished anyway, that becomes exacerbated in a situation like this when you have a pandemic where people of color and people of marginalized income become more vulnerable, because not only in a country like the United States, where healthcare is not necessarily evenly distributed, you have people who live in jobs that are at higher risk. When people talk about essential services, it sounds like those are important jobs, and they are. But the reality is, much of these jobs that are being delegated as essential services are to serve others, like serving people at fast food restaurants and drive-throughs and clerks at restaurants. And a lot of those people, and these are not high-paying jobs. They may be essential, and we know they're essential now, but they aren't getting paid like essential workers. And these are the folks who are oftentimes, especially in urban populations, disproportionately people of color. So they are placed at a disproportionate level of risk because they aren't home quarantining themselves, and they don't get the time off. They aren't getting all of these benefits from this new stimulus package. And in fact, they're struggling. Oftentimes working multiple jobs, where now they're down to one of them. And at the same time, we see more and more people who may be losing their jobs, who are still expected to pay rent in a world that is increasingly difficult when it comes to providing adequate housing for people.
Yep, that's right.
So why don't you give a little bit of how you got involved in this movement in Colorado, and where it's at this point?
Sure. A group of us did a Wet'suwet'en solidarity protest not 3 weeks before this coronavirus pandemic crisis that we're in. And we all synced up and under the leadership of Indigenous Two-Spirit that this is their territory out here. So when it came time to organize around the Colorado rent strike and eviction defense, we were already under the same understandings as a group. So we started a Facebook group, and it just kind of took off from there. Over the course of about 10 to 12 days, we ballooned from 7 of us total to, I think we're at 3,700 now.
Well, and it also captured a fair amount of media attention as well.
That's accurate. I have done a decent amount of media work trying to get Indigenous voices and Indigenous representation of our issues into the media as part of my career. So I leveraged that to make sure that as we face pandemic levels of houselessness now, that we were positioned to do so.
Well, and I mean, the housing crisis exists in many places, and it's usually worse in some of the urban environments. But in many of the economies that exist, there are the haves and the have-nots, and the people who are not property owners, the people who are really the most vulnerable, because there's very little rent control in many of the cities, and there's always these people who know how to get around any of these rent controls. So there are people who are priced out of homes in almost in every urban environment. I mean, I've got a lot of friends in Hawaii. And the homeless population in places like Hawaii or California for that matter, but in Hawaii is incredible, because the military artificially inflates the price of housing because of the number of people that are in the military there, and of course tourism disproportionately raises the property levels and the wealthy who go there. So if you're of marginalized income, you are the most vulnerable people, and this obviously has to be the case in Colorado.
It is. We have a fairly robust tourist market because we have Rocky Mountain National Park here. So we have the same situations in our cities and in our tourist economies that are affected. We also have a governor who is worth $384 million, who is a landlord, who is refusing to take action on a rent, mortgage, and utilities freeze because, yet again, these folks with the settlers, they want us to bleed money so that they remain rich.
It's funny. I was just watching a documentary on television before I came down to my studio, and it really talked about how coming out of the slave era, how necessary it was to get all those people back to work, and now as wage earners, but really inadequate wage earners, and of course it wasn't just former slaves, but it was Irish immigrants and other people who the United States and the elite were viewing all of the impoverished people, not just Native people or people of color, but anybody who was below a certain poverty line. The elite of the United States looked at them as not only necessary to maintain their wealth, but the biggest threat to losing it.
hmm The United States general population is really having a wake-up call as to how truly violent this government is.
Well, and it's funny because when you look at the role that police have played in everything from rigging elections to protecting management and manufacturing and that kind of stuff. I mean, the police literally have been these armed security guards. I mean, there were actually laws against people leaving work. If you found your workplace to be unsuitable, you could actually be arrested or even beaten by police officers or by management, and it was legal. And of course, it's you see that happening to people of color, but even non people, white people who were on the lower end of that poverty scale were subject to all this. That's why you had people doing some of the labor, like whether it's for the railroad or the canals or some of the most dangerous work. There was a way that you could look at people as just the whether somebody died on the job, it was just the cost of doing business.
hmm
Well, tell
Things
me
haven't.
tell me a little bit more. Okay, so what are there specific events? I know that you've got petitions, you've got names, you're getting a lot of people involved in this rent strike and eviction defense. But give a little more detail to what's at stake here.
Well, basically, our governor is humoring this idea that the newly houseless and the houseless population could be housed in the cattle auction arena that we have in Denver instead of allowing luxury apartments, which could house everyone, to be seized by the state and opened to house the community. So, what I'm doing and what our group is doing, we've got people phone banking, we've got Twitter storms, we've got petitions, we've got all the things going, all the way up to a COVID safe rolling rally that we're planning, where people remain in their vehicles and don't get out, but we make our voices heard, honk our horns, have banners on the side of our vehicles. This is something that was very effective in the fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline. Our very presence as water protectors when we would show up with our cars would shut down construction. So we're utilizing that tactic as people are looking to take meaningful action because they're having to choose between, do I fight with my landlord and give them the money, or do I feed my children? Do I get medicine? Like, do I feed myself? What do I do? So in
I mean, and
Colorado,
this governor does not see just even the metaphor that is created by him thinking you can house homeless in cattle barns.
no, he doesn't. He keeps telling us this regurgitated rhetoric around wearing masks that has these heavy overtones of like masking the issues.
Sure, sure. Well, and there are, I mean, look, there are places, right? I mean, there are vacant. I mean, I saw you had put a list up of all of these luxury condos and the amount of space that's available. That I'm sure one of the issues isn't even just the money; it's the clientele that they're concerned about.
Yeah, it's the same class warfare that we've seen for, since Columbus was found lost at sea in 1492.
Well, and of course gentrification, which people associate with especially older cities, right? They don't think about gentrification in the population centers that have been tied to the tourism industry, but that's absolutely what happens. I mean, because as tourism spreads or as luxury condos spread in areas that have developed economically, they it's always going to push people out of especially the people who are on the low end of the economic scale, and it's the effort is to get rid of any of that low income housing, to clear out areas, and the crazy part is even the wealthy, or especially the wealthy, they rely on the labor from the very people that they want to refuse to accommodate with any type of programs for housing.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of fear that they're going to be joining our ranks in short order.
Hmm. Well, and of course, that's always the concern, right? Anytime you see marginalized people working together, that really does concern, it does concern the elite, and that's obviously what we're seeing here. I don't know. In the intro, I'm sure you heard. I'm listening to to how this thing is playing out, and I'll tell you, right or left on the political scale, some of the things that you hear come out of people's mouths it's just incredible. Like I said, the idea that somebody can't even understand that the overtone of placing homeless people into cattle auction barns, and they think that I mean, he probably thinks it's a good idea.
Yeah, he's looking for a big auditorium to house folks in, which is, frankly unsafe if we're dealing with a pandemic where germs spread. So he's attempting to set up a situation where there's mass death, like we're seeing in New York, where there were 700 plus people that died overnight. He's trying to manufacture that in Colorado, and that's what we're looking at.
Well, I mean, and then take a look at something like Wisconsin, where instead of being prudent and putting off an election primary, or primary election, they go ahead and line people up, which is the antithesis of social distancing. And there will in all likelihood in Wisconsin be an uptick in the spread of the coronavirus, due specifically to those who I'm sorry, I'm not a big fan of the election process. I mean, in the way it works in the United States, from everything from the electoral college to super delegates that the Democrats use,
God.
to
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, even to the distribution of representation that is, like every state having two senators, regardless of their size. And there's so much that is wrong with the system. Every state has their own system for doing an election, and it is such a debacle. And I just wonder, at what point do the people revolt enough to say, look, I'm not even going to participate. I mean, I know everybody, and I'll constantly get into battles with people who say, oh, no, you really got to go out and vote. Vote is so important. But at some point, the system is so broken that unless some major effort to specifically cast a no confidence vote, I don't know if anything's ever going to change. I mean, if Joe Biden, manages somehow to beat Donald Trump in the next election, does that fix anything? I'm not
No,
sure.
it doesn't. No. Joe Biden is also like, he gets a D from Greenpeace, which means he gets more than an F from the indigenous community and our concerns about the environment. Neoliberals are not our friends, just like Republicans aren't. And I got to challenge you a little bit, John. The system's working how it's supposed to. It is meant to eradicate and make people voiceless.
No, that you're not challenging me there. But most people don't
We
realize that
agree.
decision that the system was designed this way. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, just think about what they did, not only with the Electoral College, but even even during slavery, the idea that the 3/5 compromise, because I was listening to a documentary and they said, well, and slaves were counted as 3/5 of a man. No, they weren't. They weren't counted. They were there. What was counted was the white people who claimed to own them. They were getting credited. They were getting more representation. Black folks weren't getting representation out of the 3/5 compromise. Slave owners were getting more representation. And they were getting credited 3/5 of every black man that they claimed to own. I mean, the system and the way it's even taught. So, yeah, when you look at the system, no, it's doing exactly what it was intended. It was to support wealthy white men. That's what the whole system was built for. And so, so when we say, well, how is it we still have this disparity? Well, because it was built to be non-equal. I mean, this isn't the result of a failure. This is a system that was designed to be this way.
Yeah, and now they're just trying to do the incrementalist nonsense of reconciling capitalism right now. That's all what we're seeing.
Well, and I'll tell you, if this pandemic that is happening today does one thing, and my co-host from my show in New York, Regan DeLoggins, she says, look, if there's one thing this pandemic is demonstrating is the failure of capitalism. I mean, in every possible way, everything from supplies, chain, to again, the elitism involved, the idea of rejecting. I mean, the idea of measuring, trying to and somehow create an equation where the economic risks are balanced against lives. I mean, that's an incredible calculation to make. And of course, we've seen calculations done that way in everything from war to regime changes to all of these these economic trade wars, all of these things that go on. There's always this calculus that at some point the loss of life is justified. There's a dollar figure that can be put on it.
Yeah, this time though, I'm not sure that people are willing to give up their grandma so that the GDP can go up 0.3%.
But the people in power are willing to give up your grandma.
Yes.
There lies the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there lies. Hey, we're at the bottom of the hour, so I'm going to take a break. Do you want to stick around for the next half hour, or you got someplace you got to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. I've got Desiree Kane, same last name, although we're only related by virtue of being Ongwe. She is my guest. She'll stay with us after the break, and we'll mix it up a little bit more. This is fun, and it's great to have you. So we'll do it after our break. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane, and this is Let's Talk Native. Hey, I want to thank my sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. I want to thank Eric White and ERW Enterprises, the good folks at Grand River Enterprises and Native Wholesale Supply, and the folks at Cat Res Smoke and Gas Shops. Look, and I also want to thank those of you who share the show, whether you share it on Facebook and do the shares across the group pages. Those of you who share the podcast and the YouTube videos, I appreciate all of it. I do again want to suggest that people check out our website, which is letstalknative.com. There you'll find the links to our podcast, links to our videos. We got a little bit of a photo gallery. But we also have a store, so if you want to see some of the products we have, we've got some Let's Talk Native merch. But we also have Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women shirts. We've got my White Skin shirts out there for those of you who want to make a statement against a team with a similar name. We also Jake did a great job designing a few shirts that might raise a few eyebrows. Lincoln with a noose, the executioner that he is representing his role with the Dakota 38. Some of the Wizard of Oz, considering the role that L. Frank Baum played in calling for the genocide of Native people. Some great Wizard of Oz shirts, Run of the Gaia shirts. So yeah. Anyway, check it out. So there's some great wear that will be conversation starters for you if you want to check those out. And it does go to support what we do here. And again, so I thank you guys for sharing some of what we do here. My guest is Desiree Kane. She is she does a bunch of events. She is an editor. She is a photojournalist. She is a multimedia journalist. She is involved in one of the mutual aid efforts in Colorado to reject, do a rent strike and an eviction defense. But she's also involved in a couple of other projects. So Desiree, if you would, why don't you, a couple of things. I know you've got a couple of projects that you probably want to promote. I know you've done, you've got the documentary that you were working on with Standing Rock. But let's take a few minutes and talk about how people can see your work and any of the things that you want to promote.
Sure. The thing that I'm working on right now is a 3 times a week podcast on Pollination Magazine, which is coronavirus in Indian country, news Native people need about coronavirus. So we've been doing these podcasts that are about an hour long, featuring important legal information, housing information. We're getting ready to do one that focuses on ICWA tomorrow, the Indian Child Welfare Act, and really looking at how these things are being impacted by COVID-19, because it's impacting every aspect of our lives. So I do that.
And the interesting, I just want to jump in here for a second. I know some of the work that you do with missing and murdered Indigenous women. Ironically, a lot of these man camps and these pipelines that are oftentimes connected to like the trail. What is the Highway of Tears and so much.
Yeah.
These things are considered essential services. So these things continuing to keep in place our women and Two Spirits and others in jeopardy. So so you're right. Even with, you would think if there was ever a time that people should feel secure because they're supposed to be home quarantining, that's not necessarily the case with some of these things that plague our people.
That's right. In Colorado, we have one of the most fracked counties in North America, Weld County. And those fracking rigs are still going up. The pipelines are still being laid. The man camps are still being erected and operating. So it's a really big concern because nothing has stopped. The only thing that has stopped is they're now unchallenged.
Well, and exactly, because now they're suggesting that protesting should be illegal, even if the activity that we're protesting is considered an essential service. So I don't know anybody yet that has been hauled away. Although I did hear something about one of the issues in Hawaii where a protester was arrested. But I know that this is the threat that's out there. So if you show up at a again, even doing a simple thing like, didn't somebody try to call the cops on you for wanting to do a drive-by protest?
Yeah, that happened a couple days ago. I posted a poll in the group that said, would people want to do a rolling rally? And this person lost it and called the cops, and they said I was threatening to attack other people.
Well, and of course, they have added legal, I guess, cover to go after those of us who are trying to protest some of this environmental damage by suggesting that we're violating, perhaps these stay-at-home orders and that kind of stuff. So, so they have added effort to that. And and I'm not suggesting that stay-at-home orders aren't important in light of all this stuff, but the way they get manipulated. So even something that somebody can suggest has value gets twisted around in such a way that, I mean, look, in New York, a liquor store is considered an essential service.
Mm-hmm.
There's a debate, and in fact, there's a debate on whether a gun store is. I mean, they weren't included in essential services, so of course you've got the Second Amendment folks saying that, oh, in this time of need, a gun store is an essential service. So, you know, the idea that these things are essential service, but the work that we do in trying to in terms of protecting the planet or protecting marginalized people becomes something frivolous, I guess, as far in their eyes.
Yeah. One of the things that I do with my work in with Misty, which is a Missing Indigenous Sisters Tools initiative, is to equip family-led searches in the search for the missing. So it's basically workbooks and resources for when a relative goes missing, police don't care, and the family becomes the search party. And when we have a situation where the police are not going to come look for a Native woman or anybody right now because we are non-essential as a community. So a lot of it is there may be, liquor stores, pot dispensaries, those are all essential. But as we've been told over hundreds of years, we are not essential, not in this moment, not anytime. So we're working to get families equipped with the tools that they need to better search for the missing.
Well, and again, putting it in some historical perspective, we were never even a major part of the slave trade, so we weren't even considered essential as slave labor. Oftentimes, we were regarded
Mm-hmm.
more as in the way. You brought up I don't know if it was an ad that was put out in California during the gold rush that talked about your people specifically, especially women who were Miwok, saying that they were great for labor or lust.
Right.
I'd never
That
heard that before, and it blew me away when you were saying that.
Right. I found that in the library in a book in the little town where my family's at, Ione, California, like advertisements for buying my relatives, the little girls for the most expensive for lust or labor.
Lust or labor. I mean, when I talk about the rape culture of of not only the Europeans but of the United States, I mean, there could be no greater example of that than the idea of promoting the sale of little girls for labor or lust. I mean, that's incredible. That's incredible.
Hmm.
Oh man, tell me a little bit about the work you did. Okay, there's a Standing Rock exhibit that was done in Santa Fe.
Yeah, that's in the Santa Fe Museum of Indian Arts and Crafts. It's a display. It's called Beyond Standing Rock, or
Mm-hmm.
rather an installation at the museum. It features 26 of my images and all Native photographers, art makers, all that sort of thing to commemorate, the resistance that was present at Standing Rock, standing with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and the youth that started that movement.
Hmm. And you've also been working now. Is this documentary that you've been a part of? Is that a completed project or one that's still in process?
It's a little bit of both. We premiered it at Sundance Film Festival in 2017, but like with most things around Native issues, we really have to be sure not to speak over or for a community. And so after we premiered, we went back and reworked it a little bit more, made it a little bit better, and it'll be coming out hopefully early this summer.
And what's the
It's
name of
called
that?
it's Akichita, the Battle of Standing Rock.
Now, the interesting thing, and I'm glad you brought that up about trying to make sure that you're not speaking over a community or the people that you're intended to help, because that gets difficult also because there's always this separation, and Standing Rock is a perfect example of the tribe or the council and the people, and again the overwhelming amount of not just Native people but allies who went there to support. It's easy for the whole project to get away from people and lose sight of, well, what is the process for trying to resist such a thing? I mean, the politics of it all. When you realize just how close Dave Archambault and his sister were to President Obama, and 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 the Obama administration's role in the Dakota Access Pipeline, it leads to an awful lot of conflict, internal conflict, and it leaves, obviously a lot of dissension within a community. So it must be very difficult when you do a project like the one that you were involved in, knowing that you're never going to satisfy all of the opinions of everybody in a community, because those opinions are not they're not uniform.
Yeah, that's true. The thing that really just kind of made me sad was there was all this support, quote unquote, for Standing Rock, but the level of co-option at the end of the day, Standing Rock came out of that with $22 million in debt.
And a whole lot of people who got famous and created careers out of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it was just truly sad watching people just not, they came in, they took, and then they left. And I still talk with people who live in Standing Rock that I consider my close relations. And they're, the issues still remain that were persistent beforehand, except now the tribe has less money to support people.
Well, and part of the problem is, you have people who were hell-bent on going there just because they wanted to say they went there. And, I didn't go. I didn't go because I didn't think there was anything I could add to what the people, the incredible population that was already there. In fact, frankly, if I went there, I think I would have been disappointed at the lack of actual nonviolent direct action and the kind of things that could have had affected change. Instead, it almost looked to me like it had a bit of a party atmosphere that on some levels among certain groups there, and that I found disturbing.
Yeah, there was an influx of white Burning Man weirdos that came out with their glitter and belly shirts and things like that. It was just really offensive. And there was a lot of conflict with that particular community that came out because they were straight out of Burning Man.
Yeah.
And we were like, go home. What are you doing here? I was there almost 8 months and saw a whole bunch of different groups come in and leave. And the festival community, they wanted to help, I think, maybe, but what they wanted to do was take selfies and they wanted to raise money for themselves. It was so offensive and just frankly disgusting.
Well, frankly, even the veterans groups, I found that, I was very conflicted over that, because just because you have a past that represents war, I don't know that I mean, it's almost like they were suggesting that they were going to, mount some sort of violent conflict over this, and of course didn't. I mean, they didn't. They did very little in the end. While on one hand, I appreciate the support that we get from all of these groups, but it gets really, really difficult because we don't line up politically with a lot of these groups before, during, or after these conflicts.
Heck no, John. You know what happened is we allowed the infiltrators in the damn front door. With the veterans came a level of U.S. government involvement that organizers like myself, boots on the ground, we were not prepared for COINTELPRO. We were not prepared for all of that, and we let them in the front door. Wes Clark Jr. came out on a radio show and said that he was informing the FBI. So the guy that led the veterans was an FBI informant.
Well, and look at the one remaining person locked up was locked up because of because of the relationship she had with an FBI informant, and a ridiculous gun charge. Why is that guy not in jail? I mean, the whole thing is absurd, and it shows the level of of infiltrators that make it into these kind of groups.
Yeah, and the story of Red Fawn, she's not the only story.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Probably a dozen or so storylines that haven't played out yet that will in time, just like with Wounded Knee. 30 years later, they were still indicting people. I think we can expect that with Standing Rock.
Sure. And that's why, for me, when I saw the way the support was mounting for Wet'suwet'en territory,
Mm-hmm.
I liked it a whole lot better when we took a stand in our own home communities to support somebody, to support a conflict, rather than everybody feeling like the. I mean, the last thing that anybody in Wet'suwet'en would want would be 10,000 people showing up, littering up their beautiful land out there. And so the idea of roadblocks in Tyendinaga and Ganawage and Oswego and so many, not just the Mohawk territories but other territories, the idea of people saying, no, I can fight Canada here. I can fight the United States here. I don't need to, to burden a community. I mean, there were a few women that went to Standing Rock to give birth. They went there
Mm-hmm.
specifically because they wanted to have their child there. It's like, are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not convinced after that very extended experience that I had there that having the tactic of these big camps is necessarily the answer because of
Exactly.
the level of political education that had to be done to get people in a place where they could actually defend the water constructively.
Right, I agree. And look, there are a lot of ways to attack the infrastructure that goes into these pipelines without necessarily having to be at the job site. Or in that case, most of those people never took a frontline position. I mean, at one point, it was estimated there were 10,000 people there. Those 10,000 people,
12,000.
excuse me.
12,000.
Those 12,000 people never showed up and squared off face to face with a construction crew. And I'm not even saying that was a good idea, but that never happened anyway. And instead, you created a lot of need and a burden on a community, and that ends up being something that once you leave, you never have to look back.
Right. There was no accountability to the local community. They came in, they took, and then they left. And Standing Rock, from the folks that I know that live there, they're still in the same position that they were before everyone came. And that doesn't seem like the ethos that we came there with, which is to leave it better than we found it.
Sure, sure. Well, and of course, there's also a lot of people who, hypocrites who show up in these places, native and non-native, who show up in these places to earn a name, not just for money, but for fame and recognition. And we see so much of that. I mean, I say in my intro that I'm not afraid to step on a few toes along the way, because look, there are people in the Native community, some of these very iconic images that everybody wants the quote, everybody wants to cite, and yet when you look at their histories, you realize these people have done, have been more parts of the problem than they have parts of the solution. But but they're loved by the non-native public. They're the ones who are going to get on Democracy Now. They're the ones who are going to be highlighted in the well-funded documentaries that get produced out of these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Our film was the only one that had an all indigenous film crew
Well,
that
there
I
you
know
go.
of.
There you go. Well, and again, if when you try to go for reality, you realize that you don't have to go approach it with a foregone conclusion on what you want. I mean, I say the same thing about when I talked about justice or I talk about science. You should be able to look at the evidence and let the story go where the story takes you. You shouldn't go in there with a story that you want to tell and then try to fit all the pieces together so you can build your own plot out of bits and pieces of what you were able to pull out of a community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some people came away, nonprofits and whatnot, with millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's just offensive. That's not how we do one another.
Well, and the tough part is, look, being here and working, doing a show in New York, and now the work that I do here in Seneca territory, I got asked the question lots of times. Well, how do I help? Where do I send money and that kind of thing? And that becomes a really, really difficult thing. I see, so when we talk about divestment and we talk about boycotting, I'll tell people, look, there's more that you can do to affect, the businesses that support these kinds of things. But just thinking that you can write a check and send it someplace and think, oh, there, I checked my box, I did my good deed for humanity. I think sometimes that's the short answer, and it's not. It rarely is the good answer.
Right? It's a total cop out. More capitalism is not the answer.
Exactly. And, especially when you think about, again, even the most basic banking services that that these institutions are connected to, almost everybody could play a role in affecting where the investment comes on some of this stuff. I mean, if there's one thing, as I watch this pandemic and this COVID-19 pandemic play out, I'm one of the people who applaud the crash of the stock market. And
Mm-hmm.
every time it goes up a little bit, I cringe, and and it just frustrates me even more. I mean, I look at where the opportunists that are looking, even during the crash of an economy, how they're going to make the next buck on this stuff. And that's every time we've been involved in a conflict. And historically, there have always been those that were going to, come up behind, either to exploit our story or make money off of what they were able to strip from us.
Yeah, and you know what's really frustrating, but also powerful? Some of the same banks that the very powerful Standing Rock divestment campaigns targeted, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, those are the same folks that are sending eviction notices through lawyers to people now after they've had weeks of no income. So those banks right now, they're very weak. The Standing Rock divestment movement cost the bank something like $2 trillion. That is power. If we need to be going after those banks the same as we're going after the politicians, because they're in bed together the exact same way as we saw with no KXL, the same way as no DAPL, the same way as what's what.
Right, and I agree with that 100%. And that number, throwing numbers like that out there, so people know where the effectiveness comes from, because I think that's part of the problem. I mean, there are people that I don't think people can appreciate the power that they have and the power to influence that they have. And I think the more that people realize that it isn't. Look, I'm not a big one on spirituality, so I think praying and voting isn't the way that you're going to get out of these problems. There are some real specific things that we all can do and we all should do. And when I look at those who will say, well, I send my thoughts and prayers, and then on one side of their mouth, and then they'll advocate people who the next candidate is that they should vote. I produced a sticker that said, the sticker for Native people is, I just contributed to the, to my oppression, by supporting the next agent of my oppression. I mean, it wasn't just a "we vote," I voted sticker. It was I contributed to the agents of my oppression, and that's where. And the agents aren't, like you said, they aren't just the elected officials. They are these financial institutions, and we need to do more. We talked about this during the Poor People's Campaign. There has to be a stronger effort put forward to solidify local economies, the kind of, and I don't mean economies based even necessarily on currency, but how we have relationships with each other, the people who we are not only closest to, but the people who we are politically and culturally aligned to. We need to have better relationships when it comes to that.
Yeah, although John, I think that there is a place for prayer and action in the same breath, right? When you go to the bank and you're pulling out your money and you're doing it as a form of nonviolent direct action in solidarity with relatives, that is a type of prayer. But I do agree that you can't just pray away your woes. You have to have action behind those prayers.
Even the notion of prayer, though, it's the kind of thing that should be infectious. When I think about culturally, the act of giving thanks or appreciation, it isn't just that you're trying to thank some nebulous spiritual creature or mystic creature. You do it to be infectious with the young people and the people around you. You want to show the act of acknowledgement, whether it's whether it's words that are said when game is taken or when seeds are planted. It isn't that that deer who was fallen isn't happy to be your next dinner. And whether you burn tobacco isn't going to determine whether the plants come out of the ground or not. But you do that because you're trying to teach the people around you, and you're trying to show the appreciation around you. So that's to me the value of prayer, is that that it's meant to be a teachable moment. Even the Pope said, if you pray to end hunger, the first thing you should do is to feed somebody. So I agree with you on that. I agree with. It's just not. I see people looking at things like prayer and voting as their act of their civic responsibility, and I think that falls way too short if we don't take some action that goes along. I mean, look, by all means vote, by all means pray if that's what, but don't let that be the only thing that you do.
Yeah, don't have that be the performative allyship of sending thoughts and prayers over the internet while people around you suffer.
Exactly. Well, Desiree, I want to thank you so much for joining me. Look, I'd like to have you back. I mean, I don't want to. I'm going to say she needs no introduction in future shows. So why don't we plan to do this again? We'll stay in touch, and we'll touch base, and we'll continue to tell people the name is it's just a coincidence. But as far as I'm concerned, you are kin. We are related. So let's keep something going here.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, John. Talk to you later.
All right, thank you very much for joining me. That's Desiree Kane. No family relationship, but related through our only kinship, I guess. So I want to thank Desiree for joining me for the hour. Great stuff. Great work that she's doing, and what she demonstrates is that there is work to be done. If you don't know what to do, then look, reach out to some folks. Reach out to folks like Desiree and find out what can you do in your community. What are the actions that are happening in one community that can be replicated in another to stand up to some of what's going on. I think it's a terrible situation when you consider that $2 trillion was set aside that is mostly going to go in the pockets of the wealthy, and yet there's still going to be those people out there who are going to criticize whether somebody is getting too much to support their family. It seemed to me if you support a family, you didn't need to support corporations, because those corporations, those heads of corporations, they have families too. But instead, that's not the way things go. Look, we'll continue to do some the COVID updates as we go from show to show, and look, the numbers are getting pretty grim. So look for my posts on Facebook and on Twitter, and we'll be back here on Saturday, I should say. You can tune us in or follow us on Facebook as we do our show on Thursday, our WBAI show. Let's Talk with John Kane and Regan DeLoggins. We will continue to do our show. We're doing it remotely, and we're doing our best on the safe distancing stuff, but we'll continue to pound on some of these issues, both political, social, and economic. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.